Roshan Kindred, CDO of PagerDuty, a very large, significantly valuated, publicly traded tech company. How you doing?
I am doing wonderful, Zach. Thanks again for having me back for part two.
Come on now. Now I got to get right to it. First of all, what does that shirt say?
Oh, so it says undiagnosed, but probably I got it off of undiagnosed, but I'm pretty sure.
Come on now.
You can fill in the blank of what undiagnosed means. On any given Sunday, it has a whole lot of adjectives in there. So.
I'm right there with you. I'm undiagnosed and diagnosed, so I receive and respect it. So here's the thing. I want to get to it because I feel like part one we had a really broad discussion about a bunch of different stuff. I think this time I want to talk a little bit more about this moment, setting strategy, working with vendors, right? So a little bit of behind the curtain. And the reason I want to do that is because I think, we come into this work in this space, especially for me coming into corporate America, think about it. I was oftentimes one of the only few people that looked like me in a room. And then sometimes when like the head of HR or the chief diversity officer or whatever come in, they might look like me. I would come in and project a bunch of expectations and assumptions about what their role is, what they do, what power they have, what power they don't have. So that's the conversation I want us to have today. Mm-hmm. I believe that the truth of the matter is that employee experience is like a responsibility of every leader in a company. It's not just the CDO's role or just the CHR's role or just the CEO's role. And I believe that those CHROs and those CDOs do have a distinct and explicit accountability and responsibility to driving employee experience. So I said a bunch of stuff. I'm getting into it now. Now we're about to get going, Roshan. All right. I want to talk about people strategy today. Now, look, I spoke to somebody. I ain't going to say who it was because we might end up doing some business with them. So I ain't going to put them on blast. But I did ask them. I said, hey, so like, talk to me about like how we can support your 2025 strategy. And they were like, I'm going to be honest, I don't really have a 2025 strategy. We just kind of sitting still. As you think about 2025, what items are top of mind for you as Chief Diversity Officer of PagerDuty?
So first off, I think I'll touch a little bit on the person not knowing what their position was and want to kind of speak to the not having a strategy. I think this strategy really is contingent upon the role that you play. So if you are at that managerial level, then you are really focused on the day-to-day. If you are at that director level, then you're looking at the 0 to 12 months. At my level, I get paid to look 3 to 5 years and beyond. So for me, if I don't have a strategy, I must be looking for another job because I'm not being an effective CDO. So I kind of want to call out that before we get started. So for me, I am highly focused on global engagement and belonging and how that looks within PagerDuty's landscape, both from a business perspective and an employee experience perspective. And I'll give you a little bit of insight. So when I think about global engagement and belonging for our EMEA team, that looks very differently than what that looks like for our PagerDuty Japan team. It also looks differently for what our US and Canada teams look like. And so how are we both helping them to develop our platform and also supporting them in their work experience as they work and serve our customers?
I think there's like this global element to any type of effective strategy, right? So it's global because there needs to be some sinews of connectivity across whatever you got going on, but it also has to be local in terms of relevant to like that area's geography, culture, market needs, all those different things, right? I think it's really easy to have like really nice, fluffy goals on your site. But like the actual work of being like, okay, hey, look, like our representation goals and our training and enablement goals aren't really going to look the same in like South America as they're going to look in some parts of Europe or Mexico or North America, right? And so, I love that. It's interesting. And also just to land the plane, this person, she was a CDO like you now, Roshan. I ain't talking to respectfully, I'm not talking to non-decision makers around here. Okay. Okay. So when they said it, I was like, okay. But it stuck with me. And she's like, we're just kind of going with the flow because we just don't know what's going on. And I think that leads me to the next question, which is offline. I'm having a lot of conversations with CDOs who are a bit frozen in this moment, right? They're unsure of how they should even structure their strategy for next year. I think so many of them, it's funny. So I talk to a lot of CDOs and CHROs and then also like HR VPs. And then I'm also talking to entrepreneurs, like small business owners, and everybody's saying the same thing. Hey, it's just quiet right now. Like we haven't gotten any direction from leadership, and I'm trying not to get my head up too high before it gets chopped off. I'm just chilling. I'm trying to just kind of keep everything smooth sailing. How do you navigate beyond like? And I'm again this. I try not to like beat up on people in these positions too bad because, there's a lot, and we're going to talk about like, there's a lot of layers and variables into this work. So this isn't me trying to pick on nobody. How do you though navigate beyond that fear, right? And what advice would you give to other leaders in similar situations?
So first, that word fear is in my world, false evidence appearing real. So since I make data-informed decisions, I go straight to the data because that gives me a sense of grounding when my perspective might be somewhat uncertain or not as stable as it should be. And that really helps me get in a solutions frame of mind versus a reactive frame of mind. So if you're someone who is sitting around waiting, then you're not influencing or driving change. You're a byproduct of change. As a change agent, I have to be poking. I have to be exploring. I have to remain curious, or I'm constantly in a reactive mode. So the first thing I do is move all fear aside. I check my own self, get myself in order. I gather myself around the data, and then I look at what is the data telling me? What does the feedback of my peers and my leaders and customers and employee base telling me about what's happening in the world, right? And then I develop a hypothesis on what type of change then from my remit where I sit in this role can I help drive? And is that change both helping my customers, helping my employees, and helping PagerDuty's brand and mission? And if it's meeting that criteria, then we move forward. Now, some of it is niche and nuanced to, we think globally, act locally. So some of it is going to be niche to where that information is residing with. But when I think about from a strategic standpoint, I then again get centered on global engagement and belonging. And the reason why I chose something very broad is so that I wouldn't have to be stagnant, so that I wouldn't every year have to think about reinventing myself. But when you think about, what's going on in Iran, what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in the Middle East. If I apply global engagement and belonging to all of that, I can come up with a strategy and a resolve. But if I get very insular about my frame of mind or my point of view, then I'm always addressing scenarios or situations. I don't have the expertise as a sole individual to say I'm the subject matter expert of everything, but I will keep a broad enough perspective so that I can take in opinions and foster that sense of belonging that will help people as they navigate those situations of life. So my advice would be keep it real. Be flexible with your own level of understanding, but resolve yourself in the data. Because one thing that data doesn't do, data doesn't lie. Data doesn't lie. Data gives you trend. History has proven to repeat itself. So if you can have some learned experiences from looking back in the past, filling in those gaps, you're on to something that's going to prove to be beneficial. It may not be the exact resolve that you need for that situation, but it's going to keep you progressing forward and not standing still.
I love that. And, I think the only thing I want to note about what you're sharing is to your point about fear and leveraging data to then kind of navigate beyond and push beyond fear, is that folks be scary out here, Roshan. Like people are scared. Like, and I've had some conversations. I mean, I worked for a pretty, they've since gone private, but I worked for a fairly large tech company, and their, the CDO at the time, they were new at that level. And there were other factors, right? Personal factors where it was like, look, like I ain't really been in this kind of seat before. I don't want to lose this seat. I'm trying to, I'm kind of like on my last little stint in this thing. I'm older. And so I love that though. And I think what's interesting too is, as some things like, well, how do you get past that? But it's like, well, if you don't pursue the data to then help you understand what the reality is, then you're just going to be in a fear-driven cycle, right? So like so often what'll happen is, and this is not blaming CDOs, people in these positions, because there's a lot of other reasons why that revolving door is so short. But it's like, man, if you just sit around and wait, it's like, look, you either going to get laid off or get fired because the average lifespan of a CDO is like 18 months, or you can at least push and try to do something and maybe make an impact on something, as opposed to your point, just being like an outcome of something. Like I think you and I are probably really similar in that way. I like that. I like, it's like, well, damn, I mean, either way, something's going to happen. I might as well.
Exactly. You said it before I could.
Right? Like,
I think too, I want to kind of go back and peel the onion a little bit when you were talking about, the average lifespan and that fear factor, right? Or just the uncertainty factor. So when you get into anything new, when I first came to PagerDuty, like I don't want to say it was fear, it was the unknown, right? I'm learning to navigate. I recognize that I'm not this position, but I sit in this seat. And what does that mean for somebody as a Black woman? What does it mean to sit at the CDO seat in a publicly traded organization? And one of the first things I did was recognize that I don't need to be perfect. This is my first time sitting at this seat in a publicly traded organization. So what do you do when you first sit down anywhere? You adjust, right? You got to get adjusted. You got to make yourself feel comfortable. So what mechanisms, what resources are you doing? What affiliations have you gotten involved with? How many points of connection do you have with other CDOs that are more seasoned than you that can teach you some best practices about how you sit in this seat? That is what's going to help you become more comfortable. So the thing that I realized is that I had to take charge of my own success. Nobody was going to come by and say, oh, you're new, let me help you. People were going to help you for at least in my case, when I found myself helping myself. And what I mean by that is being very transparent and with my other CDO associates saying, I have never dealt with this. And this does not feel good. And yes, I don't want to lose my job, but in the same factor, I do have a job to do. And so I want to do the very best job because I want to ally with my C-suite executives, with my senior leadership team, with my middle managers, and with all of the direct employees that we have. And that means that I have to level up. And so I had to go out and get that sense of community and that sense of belonging to develop that presence. I had to do some soul searching within myself to say, what type of leadership skills are you lacking so that you can come into this environment and be the person that you want to become and then keep evolving. So that's number one, is to make sure that, again, like you are bringing your best, most authentic self into the scenario. And that's not a perfect person. That's a person like anyone else that's learning to adjust. And then once you sit there and you get adjusted, what is at hand is, do you have a point of view? Like for me, I don't worry. I do worry. So I want to be clear. I am not worried in the sake of, I don't know what to do. My concern comes with, how should we respond? So I know what to do because there's always going to be a contingency plan. Even when we have a plan, there's going to be a plan B. But like, how does that impact my people? How does that impact the way we do business? How are my customers going to respond or react if the world changes this way, the world changes that way? So my concern is not about preparation. It's more about how do I respond in a way that is going to be a benefit, that's going to add value, that's going to be a support mechanism to what's going on, and not a adversarial or non-empathetic or lack support for or empathy for what's taking place. So for me, I want to know, do I have the capacity to deal with the unknown?
I love that. I want to pivot a bit because, I enjoy our conversations on and off the mic. I know you're going to keep it a stack with me. I find this position of CDOs frustrating. Okay, I do. Like it's a really paradoxical, just feelings I have about them, like really in the role. So like on one hand, I have to respect folks who work because we're in a capitalist society. You have to work to have a job. Okay. So that's just the way it goes. On the other hand, I can't tell you how many personal experiences I've had and stories I hear from others from people who are in these positions who do not push or advocate as much as they could, especially for those who look like them, seemingly, keyword, seemingly. I'm going to say it one more time because people in the back be sensitive.
I was going to say, for the people in the back.
Yeah, seemingly in a sense of spirit of self-preservation, right? And I say this to say, I don't think I'm looking for folks to be necessarily James Baldwin or Kwame Ture, right? I am looking for, I have an expectation though, that they're a little more willing to leverage their voice and influence in moments of like ridiculous situations, right? So I give you an example. Layoffs are happening left and right. All these organizations. I got a notification literally before we got in this conversation about this AI company, ironically, laying off like 1,300 people. And like they got laid off without no warning. But we also see oftentimes there's been like a bunch of research and things around like when mass layoffs happen, Black and brown people are disparately impacted, right? I've also, because I own a company where people send me like personal stories, like I've had stories of like where it's like, hey, we're to leave this whole department and everybody in the department Black, and there was no pushback on it, and they were like, hey, if they sue, let them sue, right? So like these types of moments where it's like, dang, or the data that shows, hey, like Black women are oftentimes underpaid. They might even be properly leveled, but they're paid the same as like people 2 levels below them. Like these are like trends that happen all the time. Where's the voice in that, right? And so what in your mind, especially in this moment, would you say CDOs, specifically, I'm speaking to CDOs, I'm not speaking to managers, I'm not speaking to mid-level managers, CDOs are responsible for, and what are they not responsible for by merit of the seat that they sit in?
So it's an interesting question, and thank you for it, because when you first started off, my mind first went to all of the things that you won't ever see. You won't ever see that advocacy. You won't see when the CDO gets that information from HR, the hiring manager, and the due diligence that's done to assess and make sure that it's not, all Black women or all Black men or all Latin or all LGBTQ, whatever identity that you're looking at. There is a process that I can't speak for all companies. I can say, like for PagerDuty, that we go through to make sure that equity is in everything that we do. And when there are gaps, there are things that we do to address those gaps. And so you have to justify how you make those decisions. You also have to look at, if you're in an organization and you have one department that's primarily of one thing, and they're doing layoffs in that department, then by osmosis, you're going to have layoffs, and it's going to impact that one group more adversely than it is, let's say, the rest of the company. So you have to weigh in, like, what are the unique factors of that. But having said that, those things do happen in organizations. We've seen lawsuits with name brand and not so name brand. And if you're in an organization that's willing to take that chance, and that's on your brand. That's not the brand that we represent at PagerDuty. We are on a mission to build a more equitable world. So for us, it's bigger than just we're living out our core values. And so we put mechanisms in place to hold ourselves accountable for the things that we say we want to impose on the world. We want to be examples, not a one-off, but we also want to check ourselves. So we keep ourselves in check. We are not a perfect organization. We don't get it right all of the time. But what I will say is we take a proactive approach to ensure that instances like you name don't become a PagerDuty instance.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, and so what's funny is, we were talking about data before, and we're having our own conversations about just insights, right? And so I remember I was talking to somebody who was telling me about what was going on with the organization. I said, "Man, did y'all do like a disparate impact analysis like before y'all made that decision?" And they said, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, okay." So
I was going to say, some people don't know what that is.
Right. Like this, hey, like before you make a major organizational decision, it's like a granular analysis of your organization to understand what the impact is going to be on all employee types. Right. So like, it's like, hey, look, if we make this, what's going to happen to these different cohorts of our employees? And then also if we but disparate impact is also, it's not just about identity groups like that. It's also about like, hey, like, what are the business implications of this decision? Right. So like, hey, like if you decide to lay off like 10% of a group and they're Black and brown, well, that's okay. Well, that's one problem. But then also what customers are they engaging in? Like, what is that going to do over time? Like beyond to like your immediate, like to revenue, like to generate revenue in this department or whatever the case is, if you decide to keep that product line or service line. But also, like, what is it going to do to your reputational brand, right? So it's like that type of just that thinking, right? It does not happen as often as one would assume, right? And so like that's where I'm just like, man, like what are we doing? Sometimes this work, Roshan, it seems more often, right? And this is like not me. Yeah, I'm not the person. This is my show. I'm gonna say it. It just seems very ornamental sometimes, right? It's like, okay, like what strategic work are we doing right now? Because like we're in this really unique position. When you think about the timing of like where we're at, especially when you look at like 2020 to now. Mm-hmm. Oh, like, yeah. Right? Like we were like in this huge racial reckoning in 2020. Police brutality was front of ticket. There's a pandemic, and it's kind of eerie, right? Because like looking at this election, racial conversations are starting to become more and more like back to the forefront. There's concerns about a pandemic again. Like there's all these, and this cycle is speeding up. It feels like, again, I'm not saying this moment is carbon copy to 2020. I'm saying though that you can kind of see some thematic points of similarity. So,
history repeats itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I think that, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for the experience that I've had at PagerDuty, but there is something to say about learned behavior, right? And you have to continuously look inward, listen to what your people are saying, listen to what outcomes and what goals that you're setting. And if you don't do those things, if you are just sitting down and you're reacting, then you're going to keep re-experiencing those same nuances. But if you are a change agent, if you are seeking to drive change, seeking to achieve your goals, working backwards from a vision, then your outlook on what's happening now is but one component of how you get to that end goal. So there's always going to be a something. I would love to say that we live in utopia and everything's just going to go as planned, but then you wouldn't have leaders. right? So I feel like as a leader, it's incumbent upon me to build the strategy, the know-how, to have the points of connection to be able to navigate through all this change, because change is ever constant and it's never going to stop. And so I think it's as leaders, what are we doing? What point of view are we establishing about what tomorrow is going to look like? And what capacity are we creating in order to handle tomorrow? And do you understand what nuances are out there and what you need to be, what support you need to navigate those nuances? If not, you're just going to keep living out history. You're going to be a character in history and not someone who's helping shape or navigate history.
Come on now.
And I, for one, want to be on the side of those who are changing history, not experiencing history.
Come on now. Let's talk about lifting as you climb, right? I think like, so there's this thing, right, where like, and we're going to talk about politics in a little bit, like relative to like how it impacts work. But, you know, I never forget, this is random. I was in college and I wasn't really like politically aware for real. Like I was a freshman in college, you know what I'm saying? So like, I was just kind of like, where my wife at, you know? So, and so, but anyway, I remember a good friend, they're good friends now. At the time I barely knew him, but the, one of them said, man, I love Clarence Thomas. Like, he's so great. And then the other person was like, Clarence Thomas is not great. He'd be, look, and he like listed all of his laundry list of problems, right? This was way before he got ousted as a side piece. I'm talking about like, this was like before that, right? This is like in 2008, right? So we didn't know none of that. We didn't know he was getting flued out. So this is about like just backstory. And he said, but the reason I bring this up is what he said, and it like shut the whole conversation down. I was like, oh snap. He said, Clarence Thomas be opening up doors and slamming them behind him. Like, what's going, like who, like where are the people that look like us that are going to help us? And when I think about lifting as you climb, especially in a position of like senior leadership, beyond like necessarily putting somebody on and getting them a 9-to-5 job, what does it look like to work with small businesses and identify vendors to support, you know what I'm saying, your organizational and operational strategies? So I want to ask you about how you determine the right vendors to work with. But first, I want to ask, do you think small business owners have misconceptions about leaders and the budgets they may or may not have in terms of and kind of how to ingratiate with a brand?
So I think it really depends on when you're having that budgetary conversation. So if you work for a large organization and you're in charge of a budget, there is a budget season that the due diligence, as I call it, that you use in order to help you navigate through the year. So if you come to me in the middle of the year, I don't have the budget. There's no wiggle room because I've been given X amount of dollars and those dollars were allocated during budget season. So I think as a small businesses have to think about who they're targeting and be very strategic in their ask. If you're asking for funds and you need them in the next 2 months, you probably are not going to get that from a larger organization. You might want to work with someone who has a bit more flexibility in how they allocate their spend. If you have time, you want to foster a relationship with that potential vendor. So that sale may not come in the 1 to 6 month cycle, but everybody takes a look at their budget on an annual basis. So the sale may come in 8 to 12 months, but in that 8 to 12 months, or in that 1 to 8 months, you've done enough due diligence on what the needs are of that company that you not only have the ability to come in and support them in what they're looking for now, you've learned them. So you may have something else in the rubric to say, you know what? I'm looking at your platform. I know that you need this technology, but we also have this other aspect of what we bring. And I think putting those two together gives you a more robust platform than if you were to use one or the other. But you wouldn't have learned that if you just came in from where you were and your need and what you needed to accomplish. So for us, I think about how PagerDuty engages with their customers. We're looking to solve big problems for big customers. Well, you don't just come in the door knowing what everyone's problems are, right? You have to foster that relationship. You have to understand what the needs and complexities and obstacles are of your customer. And then you can say, now here's how I help you. And in return, me helping you, yeah, it does. I have a product, I have a service, but I'm solving for your problem. I'm not selling you something. So I think that small businesses have to come with a very consorted approach to how they engage larger organizations. If you're dealing with like peer to peer, then you got to think about, okay, let's keep it real. What does your budget look like? What does my budget look like? What are your needs? And how can we maybe partner together to get some things done? So it really is contingent upon like where you are and who you're talking to. But I do think that when it comes to small businesses, the world of technology changes everything. And so a small business today is a major corporation tomorrow. And so I love dealing with small businesses because that is my way of lifting as we climb. When I talk to a small business vendor, I'm like, listen, these are the things that I need. This is what's going to help sell you. Even if you don't get my sale, I'm going to give you something so that you can be more equipped when you go to the next person that has the same situation that I have or the same platform needs that I have. Something to help them grow because, again, small businesses are the heartbeat of corporate America. And at least in my opinion, and small businesses, again, move into various stages of, a business's life cycle. Facebook wasn't Facebook when it first started out. It was two guys in somebody's garage. Mm-hmm. So you never know where an organization that's small today, where they're going to be tomorrow. And so for me, I look at it as an opportunity to both give back, to support, and even, do business with someone that's on their own journey of their business cycle.
I love that. You talked earlier about just PagerDuty living out its values and being equitable in decisions you make. When we talk about identifying vendors, what role does equity play, if any? And kind of like, I think concurrently with that, what advice would you give to large P&L owners seeking to support small businesses in 2025?
So I think, I'll give you a good example. I won't name the vendor's name, but I was working with a smaller vendor that I wanted to bring on to help automate our ERG process. And we were dealing with compliance, and they had a huge element of the contract that like a small business would not actually need that much of this component. And so we went to legal and we went to our procurement department and said, listen, this is a small business. It's a brother and sister owned business, minority business owner, but look at their product. Their product does everything that I need their product to do. Tell me what, if any, breaches in working with this customer that we would run up against. Where's the risk? So we did a risk assessment. Yep. So you're applying this policy to this organization who doesn't need this level of support only because that's just the way your policy reads and that's just the way that it's been. But there's nothing that would harm PagerDuty's brand, or it's just there because that's just the way it's always been. And so it's taking the due diligence and saying, yes, we have policies, we have a rubric, but let's really, drill down. Why do we need that thing? Now, with a larger organization, that may be like the specific instance that I'm speaking of, you may need to put that rubric together. But where this vendor was working, it wasn't going to breach our systems. It wasn't going to breach our, it's in support of our ERGs. So there's a different level of engagement. And we felt like this is a room where we could have some flexibility in order to bring on this vendor. And it's been working excellent. So we're very happy with that relationship, but happy to also look at how we do business and make it easier for smaller businesses to work with us.
Yeah, and you know what though, like with that, the presumption there, like of what you're just like in the scenario you outlined, and salute to that small business, is intentionality, right? Like you had to, one, be clear with what your strategy was and exactly what you needed. You had to, two, like make the time to really understand like what the bounds are for this small business, and like pay attention when they're explaining. Because sometimes I know y'all are busy. Like I'm talking about the P&Ls. Y'all are so busy, and so it's easy for your eyes to glaze over, and when people are kind of explaining things. But so like to be present, understand. Okay, wait. So this is exactly what they're doing. Okay, great. Let me match this up. So then, in doing that calculus, then like the other thing that you did that I'm hearing is you had the courage to then go advocate for that small business and like really interrogate the processes and policies that really are creating disparate impact, and not in this